Okay, so let's dive into someone truly unique today. The life and sound of Sly Stone.
Yeah.
We've looked through the material you shared, exploring his journey. It's quite something.
It really is. This material, it gives us a fascinating window, doesn't it? An artist who didn't just cross genres, funk, rock, soul, psychedelia. He smashed them together into something completely new.
Right.
And seeing a Black artist do this so boldly in the late 60s, early 70s, yeah, his story, as this material shows, it's definitely one of incredible highs, but also some really challenging lows.
So where does this journey start? Well, before the icon Sly Stone, he was Sylvester Stewart, born March 15, 1943, down in Denton, Texas.
Yeah.
But the sources point out a really key moment early on was the family moving, right?
Right.
To
Yep.
Vallejo, California.
Exactly. And the talent, according to this material, it was obvious almost right away. We see mentions of him playing piano by age 4,
Oh, yeah.
which is just wild.
Wow.
Yeah. And then as a teenager, he wasn't just messing around playing. He was already working, like as a DJ, even a producer, getting hands-on experience with artists like Bobby Freeman and the Beau Brummels.
You can almost picture him, just soaking it all in. Everything around it, the gospel roots, the R&B that was evolving, that raw rock energy, maybe some smooth doo-wop too. The material really highlights how all those sounds would sort of bubble up later in his own music, sometimes in really unexpected ways.
And that fusion, that mix, it really exploded when he put together Sly and the Family Stone. That was 1966. And the sources really emphasized just how radical this band was for its time.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, forget segregation. This was an integrated group, racially diverse, and importantly, it had both men and women standing right there together, sharing the spotlight. That was not the norm.
That lineup alone felt like a statement, didn't it? The original lineup, really a family in like both literal and figurative ways. It had his brother Freddie Stone, his sister Rose Stone, plus Larry Graham, Cynthia Robinson, Greg Errico, and Jerry Martini. The material really sets them up as this collective force from the very beginning.
And once they had this unique unit, the early albums started coming a whole new thing. Dance to the music, life. They were building momentum, kind of giving us glimpses of where they were heading sonically.
But the research, it really points to 1969's Stand. That's the one that just blew up. It's pretty consistently described as a masterpiece.
Yeah.
The record that really cemented their legend.
Oh, absolutely. The material highlights tracks from Stand,
Right.
like I Want to Take You Higher, and the title track Stand itself. These weren't just like catchy songs. They became these huge anthems embodying empowerment, unity for a whole generation really grappling with massive social changes.
And speaking of taking things higher,
Yeah.
Woodstock, that performance, the sources talk about it being, well, maybe one of the greatest live sets ever. You get these details like Sly showing up in this incredibly wild, colorful outfit.
Yeah.
And just the sheer undeniable energy coming off that stage.
That Woodstock appearance, according to the material, was just pivotal. Absolutely key. It basically threw them onto this enormous stage in front of a mostly white audience, and it just shattered whatever lingering racial or genre boxes people were trying to fit them into.
Right.
They showed everyone they were the ultimate crossover act, just seamlessly blending funk, rock, soul, those psychedelic sounds you mentioned.
And a massive part of that sound, something that the material makes really clear, is Larry Graham's bass playing. He's credited with pretty much inventing the slap bass technique right there in the band.
Yeah, it's foundational.
The research points out how fundamental that technique is. Now, I mean, it's the bedrock for just countless funk and hip-hop bass lines we still hear today. Think about that, a whole musical technique basically born in this group. Amazing.
But then, the calendar flips into the 1970s, and the whole vibe shifts, pretty dramatically, actually. And Sly's music becomes this raw reflection of that change. The optimism of the late 60s started to feel, well, further away. And his sound changed right along with it.
Which brings us right to the 1971 album, There's a Riot Going On. This record is famously a departure. It's darker, much grittier, a really distinct contrast to that bright sound of Stand.
Yeah, and what the material makes clear is that this album came together during a period of, well, intense chaos. The research talks about Sly's increasing drug use, the band dynamic starting to fracture under all the pressure, the just overwhelming weight of their fame. And yet, almost paradoxically, this same chaotic time produced an album that's often considered his most brilliant. A real artistic statement, despite everything going on around it.
You can absolutely hear it in the sound. Tracks like Family Affair or Love and Hate. The material describes it as having this like hazy, almost murky texture. It sounds like the party definitely ended, And this complex, sometimes difficult reality had set in.
And that's where you really see Sly's genius shining through, even in that darker era. He wasn't trying to pretend everything was still bright and unified. He was fearless enough, I think, to let the cracks show right there in the music, to create something messy and deeply reflective of those complicated, fractured times, rather than trying to just cling to the 60s optimism.
Unfortunately, though,
Hmm.
those personal struggles, the ones described in the material, they started to dominate. Eventually, they kind of derailed his career in the later 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Missed shows, increasingly erratic behavior, and the grip of addiction are all highlighted as major factors that really took their toll.
Yeah, it's tough. And while later albums like Fresh from 73 and Small Talk in 74, they still had those flashes, those moments of his unique brilliance.
Right.
The research suggests they just lacked that consistent magic, that cohesion of the earlier work. And by the 1980s, his presence in the industry had just faded significantly, almost like a ghost, as the material puts it.
Yeah. The material mentions attempts at comebacks over the years, but, well, none really seemed to stick. He became this almost mythical figure, occasionally spotted, but largely absent from the public spotlight he once absolutely commanded.
It's hard not to look at that period as, well, tragic, especially when you consider the immense talent and that truly groundbreaking influence he'd had just a few years before.
But despite the personal difficulties, despite that period of disappearance, the material is crystal clear.
Uh,
His legacy is absolutely undeniable and incredibly widespread across music today.
oh, you can hear his influence everywhere, so many genres. The research names specific artists like Prince, George Clinton, Rick James, D'Angelo, Outkast, even figures you might not expect, like jazz legend Miles Davis, Stevie Wonder. Even the Beatles are mentioned as being inspired by him.
He really was a pioneer, wasn't he? As the material shows.
Yeah.
He was genuinely one of the first Black artists to just fully integrate rock music into his sound so seamlessly. He opened doors, paved the way for countless musicians who came after him.
And that impact, it hasn't gone unnoticed, obviously. He got formal recognition, including induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in '93. And there was that more recent documentary, 2021, on the Sly, In Search of the Family Stone, which kept exploring his story.
Yet he still remains this fascinating kind of elusive figure. That appearance at the 2006 Grammys, performing with the Family Stone after being basically out of the public eye for so long, it honestly felt like seeing a musical ghost come back to life just for that one moment.
So when we look at everything this material lays out, what really stands out is that Sly Stone wasn't just, a musician. He was a truly great musical mind, an innovator who didn't just add to music history. He fundamentally reshaped it.
He was fearless, just fearless in blending genres, fearless in breaking down social barriers just by being who he was and making the music he made, and fearless in speaking truth through his art, even when that truth reflected much darker times.
Absolutely. Despite the struggles, despite the periods out of sight, his musical legacy is just solid. It's untouchable. If you haven't really explored his discography, this material makes a really compelling case to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe start with Stand. If you want to feel that incredible, optimistic peak, that late 60s sound, then maybe jump over to There's a Riot Going On to hear the raw, complex birth of modern funk and how he captured that shift in the times. The material really emphasizes how these two albums show such different but equally brilliant sides of his genius.
And listen specifically maybe to the song If You Want Me to Stay. It's from Fresh. The material highlights that bass line, calls it everything, and, well, when you hear it, you get it. It's just a masterclass in groove and feel.
Right. So here's maybe something to think about as you reflect on Sly Stone's whole story. How does an artist go from making these joyful anthems of unity, literally telling you to take you higher, to creating music that reflects this fragmented reality where there's a riot going on and then step almost entirely out of the spotlight? What is that incredible art documented so well in this material? Tell us about that intense intersection of like creative genius, personal vulnerability, and the just immense pressure of changing the world of sound.